Welcome to Panther Planet. We believe that the human experience is universal. We explore how our interconnected world is smaller than we think, and despite differences, the human yearning for connection, understanding, beauty, and truth are found both near and far. This season, Pereira, Eva, and Chris are going to show you how international traditions, cultures, and experiences impact one's identity as a local and global citizen. This is Pereira.
This is Chris.
This is Ava.
And this is Panther Planet.
The Panther Planet podcast is produced by the UW-Milwaukee Global Studies Department, UW-Milwaukee Language Resource Center, and UWM students. It is funded by a U.S. government National Resource Center grant.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. My name is Violeta Ramirez. I very much identify as first-gen American, Chicana and Latina, and I grew up being bilingual and bicultural. My family immigrated to the U.S. from Mexico City, Mexico, back in 1994. And I believe that in an unknowingly way throughout my education, I've been breaking generational patterns. So I am actually the youngest of three and the first in my immediate family to have a degree.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Can you tell me more about what generational patterns that you see yourself breaking, or like compared to past generations in your own family, like what that looks like outside of education?
Yeah, so within my family, a lot, especially with the young women, have gotten married at a very young age, or had unplanned pregnancies. So that really put a pause with what they were going to do moving forward since then. My mother was very much an advocate for me once I graduated high school to go to get a higher education, because for herself, she was able to get a nursing certificate back in Mexico, but once she got pregnant, that was all done. She never got to actually move forward with nursing. Maybe did it for a couple months from my understanding when we've talked about it, but after that it was, you're a stay-at-home mom. The traditional family dynamic of the husband works, you stay at home and take care of the kids. And then even so with my siblings, both my brother and my sister as well, young age, had kids, left the house. And even so with their own children, the pattern kind of continues. So for me, it was like a big deal that I was able to break out from that. And especially one of the things is that I'm outspoken. Like I actually call family members out on things, and being of a Latina background, it's very much of like the saying is calladita más bonita. So when you're quiet, you're more pretty, right? So it's kind of like that phrase of you should stay quiet, let things go, and just move on. But I am very much the type that does not do that. I call people out, and I think that's helped me a lot, even so now, especially in the professional world, because I do it respectfully, but I'm not afraid to speak up if I have an idea, or if I think something could be done differently, or things like that.
And I feel like many Latinos can identify with this story. Like me myself, I'm the first one in my family to also come to college, and having all these generational patterns that go through our families, that sometimes it feels like there's no way of coming out of that you have to follow through, and that you have to stay there to make sure that your family stays afloat, that sometimes that can just bring you down and keep you without going to follow your dreams. So to hear that there's another side, that you can get to the other side of this and be successful and get what you want and still be there for your family at the same time, is just very aspirational. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, it's very much, I think a lot of people don't realize how much, when you come from a collectivistic family dynamic, everything has to essentially go through the family, right? So it's not just, oh, I want to go to college. Okay, that's great. And then you bring up the fact that you want to go, in my case, out of state. Whereas Milwaukee from Lake County region is like an hour away. It's like, what do you mean you want to go out of state? Right? Like, what about us? Like, what about the family? So, and then in that case, it also rolls over to like studying abroad. So it's like, wait a minute, well, you got to go out of state, now you want to go out of the country. Like, what are you talking about, right? So
Yeah,
similar
it's
dynamic.
tricky.
How is the
Hmm.
dynamic now, would you say, now that like you've graduated, like you're on your own in a different way, like with your degree and encouraging others to study abroad? Like what is the family dynamic like throughout like those years and now?
Yeah, which is funny because, well, the background story, my first study abroad experience was when I was at College of Lake County. So I went to community college first for 2 years, then I transferred to UWM. And the story there was, it was a huge deal. Mind you, my study abroad experience with Japan was only a 3-week program, right? And I applied, didn't think I would get in. I just did it because my mom was like, just go for it. And if they reject you, who cares? You can try again some other time. To my surprise, I got accepted. And I was like, what the heck? Got a full ride for it, got to go. And then my automatic thought after all that happened was like, what am I going to tell my dad? Because now it was like, oh, great, I'm gonna go, but then how do I bring this up? And then, this is a huge story, but like at the end of the day, my dad found out. He was very upset, very angry to the point where he like told me, you better drop, otherwise you're gonna see the consequences. And I just didn't do it. So the consequence at that point was like he just stopped talking to me for the rest of the semester. So then, the summer hits, and then now it's like the opposite. We gotta go. You gotta get to the airport early. What if you miss your flight? Is the group gonna be there? And then it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I thought you were angry at me, and then after that, like hearing from my mom of, oh yeah, when you came back, he just keeps telling his colleagues, oh yeah, my daughter went to Japan. My daughter went to Japan. And then it's like, okay, well, where was that before then, right? Like the encouragement.
Yeah.
But ever since then, at least, I got to go to China once I was at UWM through UW Platteville. That was a full ride, which was a wonderful opportunity I found out about through one of my friends that did a presentation in one of our Mandarin classes. And after that, I was like, I need to apply to that. So I got to go for a full month, and then that was in June of 2017. But shockingly, too, the way this worked out is that that same year, so since and on August 2017, I left again, but this time to go to Korea for a whole year. But interestingly, even before this, like between the gap of me being in community college and completing that program until I transferred, I always had that itch of like, I need to go abroad again. Like, I need to figure this out. What kind of majors can I get into that makes me go out again? Or how can I just get out of the US, right? Like,
Yeah.
what kind of careers are there with this? And then since then, that's essentially how I ended up going to UW Milwaukee, because I was researching schools that had study abroad programs. And at the time, I was very indecisive between China and Korea, essentially because I was interested in those languages anyway. And then I just liked the exchange program that UWM had with Korea. So that's why I ended up making my decision to go there instead, because that was the goal. So then at that point, the discussion was always brought up in little tidbits of like, oh, I'm going to go abroad again. Or yeah, I've been looking at this. Or I talked with financial aid. I talked to my advisor about this and this, so it's kind of like sneaking in there. So by the time it was like me saying I applied to this program, it wasn't a shock anymore. They're like, oh yeah, you've been talking about it forever, so whatever, go for it.
And also, I feel like, sorry, for most of them, it's also really scary just to let their children, who they still see as some little kid who they had to protect, go so far away from them where they have no power to protect them or be around them. It's just haunting for them. And I'm so glad that you managed to go and get the support, but I imagine it was very hard for them to understand why you wanted to go so far away from them, and making them understand that it wasn't about them. It was something that you had to do for your own.
Yeah, for sure. But it's funny now, like considering how everything has happened. Now my parents are more my dad. My mom has been more of an advocate for me about this, but more my dad. I think it's the whole dynamic of the protector, the provider, because now it's like if I go out for leisure, he's the first like, oh, I have to drop you off at the airport. And then I have to like make sure I'm connected with them somehow with like WhatsApp or Zoom and like, oh yeah, I'm gonna message you. I'll send you pictures to show you I'm alive, So it's like things like that now, but it's not weird for them anymore that I'm wanting to travel on my own.
Can you speak a little bit more about like the dynamic between you and your mom and like what that looked like? like when you were growing up and just like into your, because it seems like based on what you're saying that your mom was very supportive of you doing and achieving all that you have from the get-go.
We've been very close. I think the biggest reason for that, aside, I mean, like with being such an advocate for me, is because growing up, I always constantly heard like, you need to go to school. No boyfriend. And it's funny because like you always hear that from, maybe whatever type of family you come from, like you shouldn't have a boyfriend and this and that. But with my parents, because of like the generational patterns, you can understand why they would
Right.
say that. So it was always, don't have a boyfriend. You need to focus on school. You shouldn't be distracted. You want a distraction, join clubs, go to sports, do this and that. No boys. So, and that being said, for her being such an advocate for me to continue on with school was a big deal because at least her thing was always to that we can't help you because we just don't know how. So you need to speak up. So at least I get that side from her as well. Like you shouldn't feel ashamed of asking for help because if we can't help you, then how can you help yourself?
Hmm.
So it kind of has, the pros and cons on that too, because I feel like I'm very much more forthcoming and ambitious. But I think in the sense that has helped me a lot with researching resources and who do I talk to? And you need to speak up because, and I always put that up even to my students now as the international navigator. So that for people that may not know what that means, I'm essentially like the immigration advisor and academic advisor for international students. So that's the thing now. It's kind of like the roles are reversed where I'm like, you need to speak up and I know it's hard. I know where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, you're here by yourself now, they're here without their family. You need to speak up. I know it's scary too because they're only 18, 19. That's the youngest. And now it's like, you need to figure it out because if you don't talk, no one's going to help you. So even for me, it's like, um, you need to speak up, even if it's a friend, even if it's a professor or a mentor, whoever it is, because even if they don't know how to help you resolve your issue or the situation you're in or what resources you need, everybody knows somebody.
Hmm.
And that's like my biggest thing. I always tell people, like, you have to speak up because you can tell me and vent to me about my parents or this or that, or like, I want to study abroad and I can't, or this and that. Like, okay, you don't know my background though. You don't know who I know. So I can connect you with people too. So it's just, even with your friends and all that. So it's just the essential part is you need to speak up.
I agree. I feel like all of college is like just teaching me how to communicate and how to network
Hmm.
with people. And you're right. It's like you show up to your office or you show up to someone else's, and it's like, oh, well, let me lead you to the resources or to the people. It's like kind of this big goose chase, but it's helpful.
It is a big journey because even in my case with my mom coming all the way from Puerto Rico here and wanting then to go to college and be away from her. We grew up as a single mom, so she was overprotective. She was
Hmm.
everywhere that I was. She knew everything that I was doing with anyone that I was, and the fact that I was gonna be away from her um, was a difficult time for her to understand, and I needed to understand. Well, I need this. This is just part of my path. I need to go to college, and that doesn't mean that I'm not gonna be in your life anymore. I'm pretty much just there all the time. It's just that I also need to do this for myself, um, and she got the hang of it. So if you speak up and just with kindness and time, you explain to them and answer all the questions that they have, they most likely will support you.
I agree with that because the way I see it too, and this is something I've told a lot of, because I did some study abroad advising as well, is that students say, oh, like I can't because of money or my parents or this and that. And of course, I've been there, I get it, but I always tell them too, it's like your parents are saying no because they just don't understand. So at the end of the day, not to be a bad influence, because there's always my spiel with them is like, not to be a bad influence, but if you're gonna rebel, rebel for your education. Because to them, this is what rebelling looks like,
Hmm.
because you're not, putting into place what they're telling you to do. But it's more about informing them rather than just doing it, right? Because that's how I say I like inputted it a little by little to my parents, especially my dad where I'm like, oh, well, today I spoke with a financial aid specialist because I want to study abroad, maybe this and that time, this is what they said. So it's kind of like feeding them like little spoonfuls of like information, and then it's like, okay, you're showing them that you're actually like putting the effort, you're being proactive, you're reaching deadlines, you're doing the research, and you're informing them. So my thing is, you're not asking for permission anymore because these are your life decisions now, but it's about informing them because then that way they'll feel more secure.
Yeah, like I had a single mom. Yeah, same. So like I understand. Just I'm like a half hour away, and it's still like, hey, can you come home this weekend? The kids and I are gonna go do this, and I'm like, ah, you know. So I do like you
Mhm.
love like you have to love it, but it's like yeah, there is like the good separation
Yeah, I
that
don't
needs
want
to
to see
happen.
whenever I have to have that conversation with my mom of, Mom, I want to go abroad. That's going to be a fun time for me.
Okay, so for our next question, how has Spanish as like just being a bilingual person informed your identity and impacted like your interpersonal interactions like in the US and also when you were traveling abroad?
It's funny because like before my whole like international experience, like I never thought me being bicultural or bilingual was cool, I guess for the lack of other terminology, but like it was just my norm, like growing up speaking Spanish only at home and with family, and then outside of that was only English. My academic life has been in English, give me a book in Spanish, like a textbook. I'll probably understand 75% of the terminology, and other than that, I'm like, what the heck does that word mean? Right? And I feel more comfortable speaking Spanglish more than anything with friends. Um, so even if I try to speak, even now, even at work, like if I have to speak with someone that only speaks Spanish, not a lick of English, I get anxious because I'm like, oh man, now it's like, am I saying this word right? Is my grammar correct? Does that word even exist in
Yeah.
Spanish? And am I just translating it to English and it doesn't even make sense, right? So even with that, again, this was just my life. So it wasn't until like I studied abroad where it kicked in of like, oh, I am unique. Like, especially within East Asia where I've been in this again, homogenous countries, maybe a good majority have not been to the US. Um, and I say that because even with the questions I got as a foreigner in their country, like a lot of people were surprised, I don't look like the stereotype of what an American looks like. So when I would say I'm from the US, they'd be like, "Really? Oh, okay." And then they would look confused. But then, if they ever caught me speaking Spanish over the phone, or like if there was another student that was Spanish speaking as well, they would ask me right away, "Oh, how do you know Spanish? Why do you know Spanish? I thought you said you're from America."
Mm.
So then it's like, then it kind of hit me sometimes where I kind of felt like I was repeating myself like I did in the US, where I would be like, oh, well, touching the immigration history again, like, oh, well, my family immigrated from Mexico and I speak Spanish and English because XYZ, right? So then at that point, my perspective ended up changing though, because initially it was kind of like, oh, great, I'm repeating myself again, and I didn't want that to happen while I was abroad. But then I had to like make a trigger in my brain of like, oh no, this is like an educational moment right now, because these people don't realize then probably that America is super diverse. It's not just English, there's many cultures, many languages, a huge immigration history,
Hmm.
and they just don't know and they're curious. So the fact that people were fascinated that I was American but a Spanish speaker and I looked the way I was, it was just kind of like, oh, okay, maybe I am cool in a way that I didn't think of myself.
Hmm.
So it's just something that it really helped me change my perspective, especially because my hair is very curly. I've had people, there was a moment I remember clearly. I was sitting at a subway station waiting for the train, and I was on my phone looking down, and all of a sudden I had this lady come up to me and touch my hair.
Oh my
Oh.
God.
And I automatically got angry. I didn't react to her, but I mean she could see it in my face, kind of like, what are you doing? But then I had to like, calm down for a second and be like, okay, she's never seen curly hair. She's probably just curious. But there's like moments like that I've had where I'm like, this is an educational moment right now. They just don't know. People here have very fine straight hair. They've never seen curly hair, so it's things like that where I was like, okay, this is just an educational moment. So I think my parents really unknowingly like made me very interested in cultures, even though we didn't have that international dynamic of being able to travel as a family, but the culture was definitely there.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Panther Planet Podcast, where conversation and culture and curiosity meet. Stay connected with episode updates, commentary, and more on our socials. You can follow us at UWM_Panther Planet Podcast. Be sure to listen next time.